All
Look
right.
at all these names of people I know.
Well, if anybody else files in here, you'll have a little bit of time before we get going. For anybody that hasn't met me before, I'm Trevor Freeman. I'm the Public Programs Director here at the Western North Carolina Historical Association, based out of this nice house behind you, the museum, the historic Smith McDowell House, here in Asheville. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end. We've got a few exciting things going on. But for right now, I'll tell you a little bit more about tonight's event. It's definitely an in-house event. We're joined by Winship director and Chesky Smith to talk about her new book on a really interesting and maybe unexplored part of Asheville history. Just a few housekeeping things before we get going. Like I said, the event is being recorded, so if you miss anything, that will be up on our website within just a few days. And as an attendee or as a registrant, you'll get an email letting you know when that is available. For tonight, also, we want to encourage you to ask questions. If you use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, that'll help us kind of keep the questions in order, and we'll try to get to all those at the end. But other than that, I will go ahead and introduce tonight's speaker. So Ann Chesky Smith is the director here at Winship, and she holds MA degrees in Appalachian Studies and Cultural Anthropology. She serves as the executive director here, like I said, and lives in Asheville, North Carolina with her family. And Ann, I'll turn this over to you.
Thanks, Trevor. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thanks everybody for being here virtually tonight. I'm sorry we're not able to do this in person. COVID is just at us again, but I think it'll still be a great learning experience here virtually, and you can watch it over and over as many times as you would like. Well, here's the cover of the book. This is a project I've been working on actually for the last almost 10 years now. I got started, I was director at the Swannanoa Valley Museum in Black Mountain for a number of years. And I know some Swannanoa folks are on tonight. But there this first piqued my interest one day when I was up in the archives at the museum, and I just found this box of papers that had been donated to the museum from Sheriff Lawrence Brown's family. And you know, if anyone is familiar with Asheville and Buncombe County history, Sheriff Brown was sheriff of Buncombe County for 32 years. And this particular case was probably one of the, you know, high points of his career, even though it occurred early on. And that was very apparent too from the contents of this box. I mean, this is a box of papers in an archive that had not been processed yet, that specifically, I'd say maybe 10% of these papers that he had saved over his career were related to this case. And it was the first I'd heard about it. And in this box was a confession. And so that piqued my interest, and I started researching into it. This is the cover of the book. I really hope you read it. I will go through a lot of the content tonight in this presentation, but there's a lot more, as you'll see, that we just can't cover in a 45-minute, 1-hour presentation. So this case, Helen Clevenger's murder, was very sensational. So you can see these are the covers of 3 magazines from 1936. Now, Helen is murdered in July. These come out in October, November, December. And these are sort of, you know, the pulp magazines of the day, but just like kind of our true crime podcasts of, you know, 2020, 2021, starting really serial that revived it all. This is kind of the serial of the day. And it's an incredibly sensational case. It's reported not only in Asheville, but across the country, and it makes international headlines as well. It's just, and you'll see as we go through this, that it's incredibly in the public eye, and especially here in Asheville, and that's for a multitude of reasons. If you have questions throughout, I can't tell just the way that I've got my screen. So Trevor, I'll let you kind of interject if there's anything pressing that comes up while we're going. But I will really try to leave time for Q&A at the end. I kind of want to start out the night. I'm not going to show you this yet, but by letting you listen to a dramatization of the events. This came out in February 1937, and it was based on the Center magazine here on the account in this magazine. And what they did in these magazines, which is pretty incredible, is that they'd have a writer, but they would interview the detectives on the case. So that's why you hear official detective stories, true detective stories, inside detective, because they're interviewing the detectives and getting their side of the story, and then kind of writing it up in a very entertaining way. But they're publishing, photos from the crime scene or of the detectives, and so they actually can be a really good source of information as long as you're considering one, that they're from the detective's point of view, and two, that they're also being kind of jazzed up for the general public. Oh wait, the chat does come up. So I'll go to this, and I did transcribe this because the audio quality is really poor, but I wanted to give you kind of this idea of kind of how big this case is, and give you a feel for the time period, for what's happening in 1936 in our media culture.
And now, revelations of mystery and horror in the Helen Clevenger case, taken from the pages of True Detective Mysteries magazine, the endless story of this sensational case, written and authorized by Sheriff Lawrence E. Brown of Buncombe County, North Carolina. Our story begins on a storm-swept night in the fashionable hotel in Asheville, North Carolina. Well, Helen, I think we got back just in time.
Yes, Uncle Will. Look, you can see the storm from my window here.
Yes. Lightning racing up the valley. What a sight.
The big smokies and a storm at night. Oh, Uncle Will, I'm so glad you gave me the chance to make this trip.
Why shouldn't I show off my pretty New York niece down here in the South, eh?
Sir, I've always loved the South, and when you told me I could come to North Carolina this summer, I was thrilled. Big smokies, cotton fields.
Yeah, and dairy meeting.
Oh, that reminds me, I must write up today's meeting in my diary.
Sure you're not writing up any big dates in that diary? I'd be jealous.
Just listen to their diary. Monday. Left the hotel in Asheville at 9. Attended meetings of dairy farmers. High Point with Uncle Will, Professor William F. Clevenger to you. Unsworth with the farmers as a faculty member from State University is meeting with approval wherever we go. All of the dairy...
Helen, just listen to me because I have a pretty 18-year-old niece along who is an honor student at New York University.
Uncle Will, this Southern chivalry has just got you all, I reckon.
Well, anyway, my dear, I'm glad you're alone. You're becoming sweeter to me every day. And you're meeting people and seeing things.
And being so happy, I'm afraid.
Oh, nonsense, my dear. Hey, this storm is getting worse. Well, good night, Helen. Will you turn in soon?
Just as soon as I take a shower, put on the new green silk pajamas and write in my diary about today.
Good. I'll call you at 8 in the morning for breakfast. You get on the road by 9:15. All right?
Perfect. And here's a big hug for making a girl so happy.
I hope you'll always be as happy as you are tonight. Well, pleasant dreams.
You too, Uncle darling. Good night.
Good night, dear.
And Then we're going to get pajamas and go to bed. Uh-oh, I forget to write in my diary. Oh, what a pen. Who's there? Who's that? What are you doing here? Stay where you are, I'll scream.
Time for breakfast. Are you awake, Helen? Helen, wake up. We have a big day before us. Good morning, sir. I'm the hotel carpenter. Anything wrong? Oh, good morning. No, there's nothing wrong. My room is right down the hall, 231. Trying to wake my niece up, take her to breakfast. She's so sound asleep I can't seem to wake her. Is the door locked? I'll just try and see. Why, the door isn't locked. I'll just step inside and talk. Yes, sir. It sure is time for breakfast. Yes, that's right. Helen, wake up, dear. Helen. Helen. What is it, sir? What's the matter? Oh, look. Look, my niece. She's been murdered. Look at her face. Oh, it looks like... Oh, Helen, poor little girl. Oh, Helen. Your poor father and mother. You stay here. I'll call the manager. Yes. Call the manager. Call the doctor. Call the police. Oh, Helen, my poor girl.
So that goes on for, another 30 minutes. It's definitely a radio program of the day, but it actually sticks pretty close to what we know of the facts of the case.
And now, revelations of...
I'm not going to play it again for you. So Helen Clevenger when she arrived in Asheville in 1936, she just completed her freshman year at New York University. She was from Staten Island, had been valedictorian of her high school, kind of a budding writer, journalist, ice cream counter sales girl. She kind of gets this image, this picture of being this, very sweet, young, innocent girl and white girl, which is very important to this whole story. Here are her mother and father, Joseph and Mary Clevenger, her uncle Clinton, and her uncle William. And so what happens is after her freshman year at NYU, her father decides, she's never been to the South. She could really do with some networking. So he talks to his brother, William, the one here on the far right, and they arrange for her to go down to Raleigh. He's a professor at North Carolina State College, which is now NC State University, where he works in the agriculture department, and he's a dairy extension specialist. So he teaches during the year, but in the summer he travels around the state and advises dairies on the best way to make cheese and ice cream. So kind of sounds sounds fun to me as a fun summer trip to visit all these places that make cheese and ice cream, which are two of my favorite things. So she goes down to Raleigh, and she ends up staying first with her uncle Clinton and his wife. They are also employees at NC State. She hangs out with her cousins, and then she and William, who she calls Uncle Billy, travel around the eastern part of the state, come back to Raleigh, and then head to the western part of the state. So they are stopping at all these dairies along the way. She keeps a journal, a diary, writes daily letters to her parents about all the things that she's doing. She asks her mother to save the postcards as being kind of a record of her trip for when she returns. And they end up in Asheville and stay a couple nights at the Battery Park, and then pack up, go further west, and then they return to the Battery Park. And that's when sort of all these events unfold. As a side note, her mother was pretty ill at the time, and really did not want Helen to go on this trip. And Helen, says, "No, Mom, I'm a big girl, I can take care of myself, you don't need to worry so much. But Mary, she lost her 2 other children as infants, and so Helen is her last remaining child, and certainly is very cautious about what Helen does. And so Helen and her Uncle William wind up back here at the Battery Park. Now, if you're familiar with Asheville history, you know that there actually were and are 2 Battery Park hotels. So the first is the one over here on the right side, kind of a sprawling resort hotel, which is sort of the premier resort hotel in Asheville for a long time. But in the 1920s, the properties bought by E.W. Grove, who you all probably are familiar with, he built the Grove Park Inn, the Grove Arcade, and the new Battery Park Hotel. So he decides, he says he's going to keep the Battery Park open, but he decides this is kind of, it's outworn its period of usefulness. He wants a modern hotel. So not only does he tear down the original Battery Park, but he levels the hill that it stood upon. And then he builds this essentially a skyscraper. And at the time, Asheville's not super pleased. If you follow, Asheville development today, certainly we see similar things today. If you can imagine trying to bulldoze a mountain or a hill in the center of downtown Asheville in 2021, I think you get some pushback. So this was certainly kind of a controversial hotel build, but in the 1920s, the Battery Park opens. It's really just the state-of-the-art resort hotel. This was not here when Helen Clevenger was here, but if you notice here in the foreground, this is just something I love. There was actually a putt-putt golf course. So if you go and look at the Battery Park, which is still standing today, and note the over to the side used to be a putt-putt course. It's really neither here nor there, but so Helen, when they checked back in to the hotel, she'd been on the 3rd floor when they had been at Battery Park the first time. But when they returned, she and her uncle are both on the 2nd floor, and she's in room 224, and he's just down the hall. This picture on the right is the lobby of the hotel. I've never found any interior pictures of Battery Park, at least the lobby area. There's, as you'll see, many pictures of the hallway and the interior of Helen's room, but I haven't been able to track down what the lobby would have looked like in 1936. It's probably pretty similar, but this is what it looked like in 24 when it originally opened. So this is Helen's room. This is room 224. You can see, the rooms here, even though this is a very really luxury hotel for the time, it's a small room. She does have her own bathroom. You can see the white door here. That is the entry into her bathroom, which sits behind this wall. This is the main door to the room. And this is just what a single room looked like. Most of the rooms were this size. It has a bureau, her bed, a telephone here at the foot of the bed, a desk where her diary is left along with some magazines. There's a wardrobe here out of the picture, a radiator, and then just one window, basically where the photographer is standing right now, right in front of the window, and a chair. So they fit quite a bit into this small room. But this is Helen's room, and this is pretty typical of what all the single rooms look like at the time. But as you heard in this dramatization, Helen, has been traveling around with her uncle for the day. She goes to bed, puts on green silk pajamas, writes in her diary, rinses out her undergarments. These are all things we know from when people found her in the morning. But pretty much, it's just taking it easy in her hotel room. And then at some point around 1 a.m., something happens. And a lot of people in the hotel hear this thing happen. Only one of them reports it to the front desk. So let me just go forward once. So around 1 a.m., there's a storm raging outside. We know Helen's in her room. We know William Clevenger's in his room. Down in the lobby, the night watchman is on his nightly rounds. He's maybe up somewhere near the roof. He goes on every floor on every hour. So he's making his rounds. People in their rooms report hearing these sounds, either glass breaking, a woman screaming or pleading. No one reports hearing a gunshot, but they do report hearing some disturbance. But of all these people, I think probably a dozen that report hearing something later on, only one of them calls the front desk. And when they call the front desk, they don't really do anything about it initially. They wait for the night watchman to come back down from his rounds, and they say, all right, well, we had a disturbance up on the second floor. Will you go check it out? So he goes and he checks everything out, but they listen to all the doors, but they don't hear anything. Everything seems quiet. So they go back down and nothing comes of it. However, what's really interesting to me, and what really comes back into play over and over again, is that right around 1 a.m., this man right here, his name is E.B. Pittman, Irwin Pittman on the right, he is staying in this room right here where this man is standing in front of the door. That's his hotel room. He's a bank examiner from Raleigh. And at 1 a.m., he is one of the people that hears some kind of disturbance. So he comes out the door, he comes out of his room, he looks up and down the hall, and he doesn't see anything. Everything's quiet. But he realizes he's in his underwear. So he closes the door, goes back in his room, puts on his robe, and comes back out. At that point, he is in this room. Helen's room it's not this first door, but you can kind of see the second door. So he's standing right across the hall from Helen's room, and he sees someone standing in the doorway. You can see there's light fixtures here and here. I assume they were on, but he says it's very dark in the hall and he can't get a clear impression of the person. But he thinks the other person is a guest, and he says to them, I wonder what that noise was. And there's no response from the person in the doorway. And so he kind of reiterates, I wonder what that noise was. And the man in the doorway says, that's what I was wondering too. So, they look up and down the hall. Pittman doesn't, thinks that the man is a guest just like he is. And Pittman goes back in his room and goes to sleep. And not until he's actually checked out of the hotel the next morning does he find out that there was a murder in the hall, in that room across the hall from him. So right after Pittman has that conversation with this shadowy figure in the door to Helen's room, but before the night watchman has gone back up to the second floor to check and make sure everything is all right, Casey Jones, who is a cab driver, as well as several bellhops who are in the hotel lobby, witness a man come down the main staircase, slink across the lobby. Again, it's night, it's 1 a.m. There's a storm outside, but the lobby's still lit, and go across into the manager's office and hide behind a desk. Once he goes into the manager's office and hides behind a desk, they start thinking, wait a second, this is not a guest. This is not someone we know. Why is he hiding behind the desk? So they get up. And then the guy bursts out of the manager's office. Casey Jones here, who's here shown on the veranda, is out on the veranda making a call to his taxi dispatcher. He asks what time it is. It's 1:06 a.m. And he watches the guy vault over this banister right where he's pointing here. And that's why he's pointing. If you're familiar with the Battery Park, the Battery Park pretty much still looks exactly like it did at that time, at least on the outside. But you can see here, this is where he's actually standing. This is a barber shop. They actually have a basement barber shop. So he says he watches the man come out of this door, which is the manager's office, jump over the balustrade, over the banister here, and then also clear, you can see this pole right here, which leads to a set of steps that go down here. So that's a big jump, and go out on the street and then run this way and around the building. All of these witnesses can't give a really clear description of the man. They describe him as sort of under 6 feet, maybe 190 pounds. And they all think he's white. And this will become very significant later on. They can't be positive, but the Battery Park, like all in 1936, the Jim Crow South, everything is segregated. The only Black people that are allowed, into the hotel are employees. And so certainly there would be a higher level of suspicion, I think, if people, especially if someone like Irwin Pittman, had thought that the person standing in the doorway to Helen's room was a Black man. Certainly a Black man would not have been a guest at the hotel at that time. He would have been an employee and would not have been in the room. Likely would have used the employee's staircase and not come out of the front entrance. So they're all making this assumption that the man that they saw in the doorway, that they saw escaping from the hotel around 1 a.m. is a white man. They don't realize the significance of what they witnessed until about 9:30 the next morning. And you see here, we've gone back to Helen's room. This right here in the doorway is where William Clevenger finds his niece's body, right inside the doorway. And so he goes to wake her up for breakfast. He knocks on the door, gets no answer, and turns the doorknob, and he reports that it's unlocked. And when he opens the door, it actually butts against her body. And he finds her and, freaks out, goes out into the hallway. The hotel carpenter is there, as you heard in the dramatization, and a maid is there. And he says, oh, it's awful what is done. The hotel carpenter goes in and looks and calls the assistant manager, who comes up and looks, has William Clevenger go back to his room. So William is not around for most of this. He's kind of confined back to his room. The assistant manager has the hotel carpenter sort of stand guard outside the room while he calls the manager. And this is the manager, Pat Branch here. He's very well known in Asheville at the time. He's been manager at almost all the kind of fancy hotels in the area. He has been in the hotel business for a long time. He's downstairs in the dining room having breakfast. So now he comes up, sees the body, and then he goes. They actually have an in-house doctor, Dr. Buck, who I don't have a great image of him. This is the best image I have of him. But he's a young guy. He's actually living in the hotel. So Branch goes up to his room. He's still in bed. It's about 9 o'clock now. William Clevenger found his niece at about 8:20. And he gets Dr. Buck to come down, who examines Helen. And all this time, no one's really actually checked to see if she's still breathing, if she's still alive. But he comes down, he does an examination and pronounces her dead. Now, he says she's been dead about 6 or 7 hours. So that kind of fits with what we eventually come up with as the time frame of when the murder happened, which is about 1 a.m. So Dr. Buck then says, all right, I'm going to call the coroner for you. So he goes downstairs. They leave the assistant manager there kind of guarding the room. William's still in his room, and they go and call the coroner. Well, the coroner is not in his office. So they all just wait. They wait and they wait until finally, they're talking about it, and not till about 9:30. So more than an hour after William had found his niece's body, do they call the sheriff's department. So the sheriff's department gets called. They say, I think there's a dead woman here. And the first deputy arrives on the scene about an hour and a half after they found her body. And his name is Tom Brown. He is the brother of Sheriff Lawrence Brown, appointed by his brother, and he is the first one on the scene. And then they take over the investigation. Now there's this whole kind of debacle about why the sheriff's department has jurisdiction on this case. Well, they called the police department too, but the chief of police was out fishing, and he ends up getting a lot of flack for that. But so the sheriff is the one who takes over the case. Also super important, it's July. Sheriff Lawrence Brown has served 1 term in office. Then he was not elected in the next term, and this is his first term back in office. So, and in November, he's up for re-election again. And this is the beginning of what will be a very long career as the sheriff of Buncombe County. But certainly the election is always on his mind. So when the sheriff's department takes over, here's Lawrence Brown here in the center. This is the coroner, and this is one of the officers. But when the sheriff's department takes over starts the investigation, there is not a lot of physical evidence, especially because if you consider, it's 1936. There's not DNA. There is blood typing, but that's about it. The forensic science is not what it is today. But they do find the bullet. Helen has been shot in the chest. She has also been beaten in the face pretty severely by some kind of sharp implement. And at the time, they don't know what it is. There's no weapon left in the room. Certainly, they know they're looking for a pistol, but they think they're also looking for some kind of sharp instrument that has made these gashes in Helen's face. So they are able to do some forensic testing on the bullet and on the case, as well as on a light bulb in the room. So the only really other piece of evidence they find in the room besides the bullet and the casing is pretty significant. It has some kind of strange markings. It's got an H and 3 stars on it. And the deputies end up going around to all of the shops that sell ammunition in the city, and they cannot place where this came from. And so they call it an outlaw brand. It's some kind of outlaw brand of bullet. The only other piece of forensic evidence that they actually find is a light bulb and the shade. So there's a light clamped to Helen's headboard, kind of a reading light. And whoever had been in there had obviously or apparently not known how to darken the room, how to turn off the light. And so they had unscrewed the light bulb rather than switch it off, unscrewed the shade and the light bulb, and then laid it on a chair. And there were a couple of bloody fingerprints on that light bulb. And they think it's likely Helen's blood on the light bulb, but they're hoping to get some fingerprints. Well, they dust for fingerprints and they don't get anything usable. So they don't have a lot to go on here, but they've got all this witness testimony. And you can see this is Helen's pajama top here. You can actually see where the bullet went in on her upper chest, and then the blood stains on the top of it. So the first arrest is actually a bellhop at the hotel. His name's Joe Urey, and he's arrested actually by the Asheville Police Department. So the Asheville Police Department within 24 hours makes this arrest. And it's purely based on the fact that the previous year, Joe had been arrested because he had escorted a man to a woman's room at the Battery Park, and the woman had been assaulted. So, this was not something that Joe knew about or was certainly guilty of. He had just literally taken the guy up in the elevator to her room, and then she was assaulted, and then he was arrested. At this point, most of the newspaper coverage, and it is covered, it is front page news and Asheville papers, Charlotte papers, certainly in the state, and it's taking up a lot of words within the papers as well. And so people are already, the first day after this murder is committed, it is front page news and everybody is following it. But Joe's picked up, you find some clothes with some stains on it and that could be blood. They throw him in jail for a night and check his alibi, which checks out with the taxi driver that drove him away from the hotel that night. Decide that the stains on his shirt are probably just blood, and they let him go. But I think the police really wanted to make an arrest as quickly as possible to kind of cover their embarrassment for not being the lead investigators on the case. After that, they do get a lead. The case has gotten really sensational really quickly, and so tipsters start coming up. And the first really solid and significant tip they get is that Mark Wollner, who's here on the right, he's a German violinist. He's very well known in Asheville. He's only been there a few years, but his concerts, he give concerts at the Grove Park and other places around, and they're always reported in the paper. He's very well known. But he was overheard saying, apparently the night of the murder, I've got a date with a girl at the Battery Park. I guess I better get a lot of wine. And so they immediately pick him up. They take him in, and he denies, I've not been near the Battery Park. You've got the wrong guy. I did not do this. And he's got an alibi witness as well, who is the woman here on the left, whose name is Mildred Ward. Her mother runs a boarding house at which Wollner resides. And she says that he was there all night. Now, in some cases, she's referred to as his fiance, but she was definitely, a girlfriend. And he had many girlfriends, which I think is another reason that he was sort of suspected. And certainly they start delving into Helen's character at the same time. Like, was she known to go with men? Could she have met someone and arranged to meet them? And really looking into, was she a hussy? Is this something that she brought on herself? Lots of victim blaming here. So they pick him up. They pick Mildred up. Here she is in her, actually in the matron's quarters at the jail. And they continually question them, but they always stick to the story. But then after his arrest, people start coming forward and say, oh, well, we saw Mark Wollner out around Asheville the night of the murder. Like, he was not at home, like Mildred says. He was out and about. We saw him all these different places. Well, to make a very long story short, they eventually come to the conclusion that because Helen was murdered at 1 a.m. Thursday morning, there was confusion among the public about Wednesday night versus Thursday night. And the night that they actually saw Mark out and about town was Thursday night. So when people were saying, I saw him Thursday night and she was murdered Thursday morning, it just didn't quite compute. And so they re-interviewed all these witnesses that had seen him out, and they said, oh yeah, we must be mistaken. It was definitely, Thursday night that we saw him out, not Wednesday night. And so eventually he's cleared. They had sent his clothing off to the state crime lab to be tested, and it comes back without any testing happening. And then the one last thing that I'll share about Wollner is that he did have a very heavy German accent, and so there was a lot of thought that, like, well, if it was him, in that doorway that night, he would have really had to disguise his voice. And they actually bring Pittman, the guy that saw the man in the doorway, to Wollner's concert at the Grove Park Inn and have him listen to Wollner's voice and see if he can identify that Wollner was the person. And he says, well, I think that the man's voice was actually higher pitched than Wollner's. So Wollner's cleared. He's released from jail along with Mildred, and they move on to their next suspect. The next suspect is Daniel Gaddy. This is Daniel Gaddy in the jail on the left, and he was the night watchman at the hotel. So, his job was to do hourly rounds. He's the one who went back up after they got that one report that someone had heard a disturbance, and went back up to the second floor and listened to all the doors to see if they could find out anything wrong, and didn't. But the reason they end up picking up Daniel Gaddy, and this is him on the right with his wife and his young son, is because when they check the watch clock, and so there was a watch clock at the end of each hallway, and to make sure that the night watchmen were doing their job on the hour, every hour, they would make their rounds, and they would punch their time clock to show that they had successfully made that round. Well, when they open the watch clock at the end of the hall, which is basically like right out, almost right outside Helen's door, he did not punch the watch clock at 1 a.m. that night. And that is the only night for the records that they have that he did not punch that clock. And so that's very suspicious to the investigators. And Gaddy first completely denies that he forgot, and then comes up with excuses. Well, I was worried about my wife is sick. I'm trying to make rent. I, had a lot on my mind. But the detectives really think they don't think that he committed the crime, but they do think he might be covering for someone else, that maybe he ran into someone at 1 a.m. That night, and that's why he forgot to punch the clock, and that he was threatened into silence. So he's held in jail for a long time, and they keep continually questioning him, and he sticks to his story that he doesn't know what's happening. So you can see here, this is a layout of the second floor of the hotel. Helen's room is right here, and they have it nicely laid out. This is in the newspaper on August 2nd. So, certainly a lot of interest. And just for a time frame, she's killed on July 16th. So this is August 2nd that they're publishing this in the paper. This is still like a huge mystery. People all over have opinions about who the culprit might have been. But here's the night watchman's key right here, where he's supposed to punch the key at the end of her hall. Here's where her uncle was staying. Then we have the elevators and the stairway that we think that the culprit probably escaped down the stairway. But here's Pittman's room. So he's really, very close to the person that he saw there in the doorway. So in the meantime, Helen, is taken to the coroner's office. An autopsy is done, and then she's, taken in a baggage car of a train in her casket up to Fletcher, Ohio, to be buried next to her two siblings. She lives in Staten Island, but her father's family is from Ohio. So that's where the family plot is. And you can see her family here in the front row as her coffin's being lowered into the ground. And this is Uncle William here, who was traveling with her. This is her father, and this is her Uncle Clinton, who lives in Raleigh as well. And her mother's too ill and sort of too overcome with grief to make the trip to Ohio. So the other person that's a big culprit, big potential suspect in the public's mind especially, is Uncle William. They have lots of questions about why an unmarried man is traveling alone with his young niece. You kind of saw a little bit of that in the dramatization about him talking about his pretty 18-year-old niece and him being jealous about her having dates, and kind of them trying to set that up a little bit. So the public is very scandalized by the fact that she's only this 18-year-old college student is only being accompanied by her unmarried uncle. And so there's a lot of scrutiny on William Clevenger, and the family is aware that is a thing that's going to happen. And so, William tells the sheriff, I'm going up for the funeral, but I will come back and you can question me then. Well, the public is just kind of out of sorts that William has left town, even though it's to go to his niece's funeral. Like, this is their prime suspect, and he's leaving town. Well, he assures the sheriff he's going to come back, but then after the funeral, he and Helen's father start going back up to Staten Island. So the sheriff actually tracks him down on their road trip in Kentucky, and William turns back around, puts Helen's father on a train back to Staten Island, and he ends up back in Asheville. In this kind of intermediary time, while they're waiting for William to come back to Asheville, investigators are sent to NC State to look at to where William lives and kind of find out about his character. And he comes off as this kind of like eccentric single man, old bachelor living by himself. He's actually kind of like an RA at the NC State dorm, and lives in a pretty sparsely furnished dorm room, but they don't find really anything to tie him to the murder, but anything to kind of besmirch his character. He's considered a loner, but it's really because of this like 1936 viewpoint of someone being an unmarried older man, which in 2021 might have been very different world for him. But he comes back to Asheville, and this is kind of the scene outside the sheriff's office as they wait for William Clevenger to come back. These are all the reporters and photographers waiting to to hear about William Clevenger's return. And part of this is because the sheriff set this deadline and says, I will make an arrest within 48 hours. And the 48-hour deadline that he sets is right when William Clevenger is supposed to be coming back into town. So of course, everybody is thinking, oh, well, he's going to arrest the uncle, and there's going to be this big announcement. So we need to be here ready when William comes back, because this is it. This is the solution to the crime. And even the newspaper is covering all the other newspapers that are flying in for this coverage. So, I mean, these are newspaper men, but there are a few women, but mostly men, and they're almost always referred to as newspaper men, who are flying in from over the country to cover this case. But he questions William. Nothing really comes of it. He finds that he's a stand-up guy, and but he's going to stay in jail until doomsday, if that's what helps. So William agrees that he's going to stay in the Buncombe County Jail, keep answering the sheriff's questions, and trying to figure out what has happened to his niece. So he stays there for a couple days, and then he gets tired of being there and he leaves. But the sheriff doesn't know and gets very embarrassed and very angry at that. But Clevenger ends up leaving the jail after a couple days and going back to Raleigh, and says, I'll come back if I can help, but right now I'm not staying in this jail. So that's about the end of July, and the sheriff's office gets really quiet. They really stop saying anything about the case, and all the reporters kind of assume they've hit a dead end, and they start leaving. The sheriff's Brown starts writing letters to different kind of reaching out to the New York Police Department, trying to investigate Helen, see if she's got a gun, talk to her friends. He's really kind of grasping at straws. He's desperate. And in that time, something really important happens. And Pittman either comes back to Asheville, the man who saw the shadowy figure, or the sheriff calls him back. And we don't hear this reported in the papers, but it is reported in the sheriff's accounts later on. And what happens is that when Pittman comes back, he says something to the effect of, I've been thinking about what that guy that I talked to in Helen's room said to me that night. And I told you, he said, that's what I was wondering too. But I really think maybe he said, it's what I's wondering. And as soon as he says that, the sheriff has this light bulb go off. Well, it's what I's wondering is the remark, of a black man. We have been barking up the wrong tree this whole time. So he takes this incredibly racist statement, which comes weeks after the investigation and is not reported in the paper. And he dismisses the idea that it could be a white man at all. And so he brings in all the black employees in for investigation and starts questioning them. And he eventually narrows it down to a couple guys that he thinks maybe own guns. And one of them says, why are you questioning me? You need to talk to Martin Moore. He has a gun. They had talked to Martin Moore and released him. But they go over. After they hear that, it's the middle of the night. They go over to Martin Moore's house. This is it, in the Hill Street neighborhood. He lives there with his mother. He's 22 years old. They wake him up from a dead sleep, and they say, show us where you hid that gun that you killed that girl with. And Martin says, I didn't kill anyone. And they keep pressing him, and he says, all right, my gun is under the house, but I didn't have it. I had lent it out to another man that they had in custody, whose name was Lim Roddy. He was another African-American man at the hotel, and he gave it back to me after the murder. Well, they take Martin in, they grill him all night long, and he eventually signs a confession that he killed Helen Clevenger. And they find the gun. They find a gun under his house, or rather, Tom Brown, the sheriff's brother, crawls under the house and comes back out with a gun. And so Martin is immediately put in jail. There are certainly reports of potential lynch mobs coming. None of that ever happens, but it's certainly a possibility in everyone's mind. And then after the confession, they have Martin Moore, before they even release that they have made this arrest to the press, they have Martin walk through a reenactment of the crime. I'm just going to show you a few pictures. I know I'm getting close on time because I can never keep it to the amount of time that I say I'm going to, but they have him do this reenactment. And if you read through the transcript of this reenactment, and you can see the stenographer here who's recording it, there's a lot of, "This is how you held the gun, right, Martin?" And he says, "Yes, sir." "This is how, show us how you place the light bulb on the chair, Martin." And he places it on the chair, and they said, "Are you sure that that's how you did it? Maybe you should do it like this, if that's how you did it." And so, he follows their instruction. And so they've got, this is Sheriff Brown and a lot of the other investigators here. And they've got him going through the motions of reenacting this crime, taking the light bulb out, placing it on the chair, standing in the doorway, which, the door does open inward, and this is taken during the daylight, but I think it's pretty apparent that you can see the figure of the person standing in the doorway. And this is the most important part of the reenactment, I think, besides the kind of coercive nature of it in general, is that, the taxi driver who we saw before, Casey Jones, saw this person come out of the manager's office and jump over the banister here. Martin comes out of the ballroom door. So the ballroom in this picture, you can't see it, but it's up here on sort of another half level. He comes out the ballroom door and crawls down the side of the hotel during the reenactment. So in this picture, you can see this is where Casey Jones saw the man come off. This is where Martin Moore comes off the side of the hotel. So pretty different locations. And at the time the newspapers report seeing the reenactment, it's not till about a year later that one of the reporters who was there that day, in a totally unrelated article, talking about, how reporting really isn't that exciting, but he talks about this case, and he talks about watching the reenactment and how the reporters there did not think that Martin Moore had done the crime. But that was never reported in 1936 while they were actually reporting on the reenactment. And we go into a lot of why that could be, as far as who owns the paper and who rules the city, but we won't go into that tonight. And so the next day, the paper comes out. It's the best-selling paper to date, even over when the Lindbergh baby was found. They sell tens of thousands of copies that first day. And this is the paper, and then the photograph from Lawrence Brown's collection that he saved from when that extra edition of the paper came out. He gets accolades from all over the state, published in the paper, telegrams, phone calls. This is, major news. Within 1 week, Martin's in a courtroom. That's how long his defense attorneys are given to prepare his defense. And incidentally, he did not have an attorney appointed when he gave his confession, nor when he did the reenactment. It was not till 24 hours later. The jury is 12 white men. African-American men are allowed to serve on a jury at the time. Only one of the 150 who were considered was African-American, and he was dismissed. He brought a note from his doctor, and in the book, you'll find out a little bit more about why he may have, you can probably imagine why he may not have wanted to serve on that jury. So Martin has 2 court-appointed lawyers. One of them, Scroop Stiles, makes it often and abundantly clear that he tries to get dismissed from being his public defender He makes it abundantly clear that he is only doing this out of his sense of duty to his position. It's a 3-day trial. When Pittman testifies under oath, he says, the man in the doorway says, "That's what I was wondering." I'm sure this is no surprise to anyone, but Martin is convicted. He's actually was indicted on two counts, one for murder and one for burglary. He says in the confession that he signed, he says he entered her room for burglary to rob her. But they only try him on the murder count because they want to be able to try him on the burglary count if he gets off on the murder count. And the penalty for both of those is an automatic death sentence. So he's immediately transferred to the Central Prison in Raleigh, where this picture, I think, says it all. The wages of sin is death is written above this jail cell on death row that he's held in. He gets one appeal automatically. So his sentences, he's supposed to be put to death on October 2nd, but he gets one extension till December 12th. But his attorney doesn't file the appeal correctly or on time, and eventually it gets down to just it's up to the governor to grant him leniency, which of course does not happen. What really puts the proverbial nail in Martin's coffin, though, is that he will take back his confession and then immediately confess again. And the reasoning behind that is because he thinks that the sheriff has told him, like, tell the truth and you'll be granted leniency. And so whenever someone comes up that he thinks has been sent by the sheriff, he confesses again. And that continual confessing is what really puts the nail in his coffin. And one thing, I'm running out of time, and so I want to make sure to make a couple more points, which are: one, during the trial, he has kind of two defense. He gets on the stand and he says that he was beaten into confessing, which of course he's the only one to say that, and the prosecutor goes at him and makes him kind of trip up on words. He has a 6th grade education. He's been working to support his family since he was out of school in the 6th grade. And I really, throughout this, it becomes really apparent that he's really just trying to tell them what they want to hear. And he thinks this is all going to stop. And they do have someone back him up. The janitor at the hotel, at the courthouse, says, "I was missing a piece of rubber hose the day after Martin confessed." And Martin says he was beaten with a rubber hose. They also have his girlfriend testify, along with a couple other people. It was her birthday that night, and he was at the party all night. And they have them testify, but even in newspaper reports, like, their testimonies are only given this very little bit of time, kind of in an interior page, where the prosecution is given these huge swaths of the front page. So he ends up on December 12th in the gas chamber. The NAACP takes up his case. This is Reverend Breeding, who's the head of NAACP in Asheville. They have a very, there's all these rumors flying around Asheville about a potential other suspect that has not yet been named. And he begs the jailer and the warden and the governor for more time, but they say no. And they raise funds from Black people and white people who are both supporting this appeal for Martin. But no one, but his sentence is not commuted. He heads to the gas chamber and dies in the gas chamber less than 6 months after Helen Clevenger was murdered. His family does not have the money to claim his body. His body, without his consent, ends up as a cadaver at Wake Forest Medical School. And then a couple months, about 2 weeks after he dies in the gas chamber, William Pickens, who is a reporter for one of the Black Run papers, or is it for the Black Run United Press papers, publishes an article that says, was Martin Moore guilty? Read this if you think he was. And he, you know, goes over all these points that we've already made about the witnesses and the pitman saying, that's what I was wondering. But he comes out with this piece of information about a Black woman who was a maid in a prominent white man's household, who answered the phone, and the person on the other end thought that she was the lady of the house. And the person says, well, they figured out who killed that Clevenger girl. It was the degenerate son of, and they won't print the name. No one will say whoever this person is because of libel laws at the time. But there's all these like little snippets of rumors and papers throughout Asheville and Charlotte, where they say these little things, and they're usually like tucked at the end of an article in the back page of a paper, where they say, you know, there were rumors about this prominent white man's son who was arrested, or, you know, there's always these little snippets of rumors, but they never name the man or his son that there are these rumors milling around about. And so at this point in 1936, you know, reading through these accounts, we don't know who it was, who are these rumors about being the murderer. But in 1985, and I was going to play this for you, but I am running out of time, Booker T. Sherrill, who was a bellhop there at the time, gives an interview where he says, you know, I was an employee of the hotel, and he does this without prompting from the interviewer. And he says, you know, I don't think he did it. I don't think he had the mentality to do it. You know, he came in and worked as usual after that. But we always thought that the manager's son had something to do with it. And this was the first time I had seen someone actually name the son of a prominent white man. So I keep seeing these rumors of son of a prominent white man, but he's never named. Well, this is the first time we see the son of a prominent white man named in 1995 interview.
So the night of that murder.
Oh, sorry. And Pat Branch, who was the manager, actually had two adult sons in 1936, Eugene and Pat Jr., who was actually younger, even though he was the junior. At the time, Eugene Branch was a manager of a hotel in Virginia, and as far as I can tell, Pat was in Asheville at the time. But in this box of papers put together that Lawrence Brown had saved was this letter, which really, through my research, this letter did not stick out to me till about halfway through, where he writes the police chief in Winchester, Virginia, and asks them to investigate Gene Branch. And I don't ever find any response to it. But this is the only time in my research that I've come up with the son of a prominent white man who was potentially being mentioned in rumor, and evidence that the sheriff was investigating him. I have not been able to track down any response or anything that came up from this investigation into Gene Branch. And certainly his name is never brought up in any of the newspaper reports, Black Run or White Run. And so that's really where we leave it. I did as much research as I could into Gene and Pat. They both married 3 times throughout their lives, did not have children, but there's nothing to significantly suggest in their histories, you know, that this would have been, that they were the degenerate son. And so that's where I'm going to leave it. I'll be happy to answer questions. I hope you will read the book. There's a lot more to this case than I was able to get into tonight. But I hope, you know, by putting this together, sort of compiling all the resources that I could find, that other people will look at this and maybe they'll find that box of papers. You know, at an estate sale or in an archive somewhere. You know, a lot of doing this archival work is like being a detective. You sometimes you don't know what you're looking at, and you know, you don't know that this letter right here is incredibly important, and it's just sitting in a box waiting to be processed. So I hope that people can take this, learn about, you know, Asheville in the 1930s, really understand that this was, yes, the murder of Helen Clevenger, but likely also the murder of Martin Moore. And when you look at them side by side and you see this just horribly tragic death of this young woman with, you know, a whole life ahead of her, but then you look at Martin in the same light, and knowing that we don't know where he ended up. We know he went to the medical school as a cadaver, but where was he buried? Was he buried? And the book talks a little bit more about that as well. So I really hope you'll read it. Let me look and see if I can get to the chat and the question and answer. Let me see. Yeah, any ideas who really did it? I wish I did. You know, the more that I think about it, I try to go down these crazy rabbit holes, especially with the Branch family. And I don't know, but I'm hoping that that's what this book will do, that it will get this out here. It will hopefully, I'd love to have a posthumous pardon for poor Martin. And I hope that other people will find it as interesting as I do, and as a compelling story, and will kind of take up some of the research as well, and that someone out there will see this important documentation and come forward with it.
Thanks so much, Anne, for presenting. This was a really great overview of the book. Maybe if you want to address this question, somebody asked, about the uncle, William Clevenger, and if he was ever investigated, or how it was strange that she left the door unlocked, and what can you say about
that? So I really looked into William Clevenger, and I personally came to the conclusion that he was not, that he yes, he should have been a suspect, but I personally do not think that he was the killer. I really think, everything that's kind of said about him by not only his family, but his peers, is that, I think he was just her gay uncle who, wanted to give his, spend some time with his niece. And I do think, he was just as devastated as everyone else. So I really don't think that it was the uncle. I know that other people kind of have that opinion. It was pretty typical for people to leave their doors unlocked. There wasn't AC, and it was the middle of the summer. One of the guys across the hall just had his door wide open. And that's another sort of point of contention in the book, because Martin in his confession says, he tried that door before he went to Helen's door, but it was locked. So that's why he went to hers to rob her. But Gaddy, the night watchman, had actually reported that door had been wide open when he went up, for his rounds. And he was like a little concerned about it, but he did note that. And I think that's a pretty important moment. But also, Helen was actually a member of the Baha'i faith. And so there's actually a lot said about her faith, and it, having this trust of people, and that's maybe why she kept her door unlocked. But really, it was pretty typical of the time. And I will say there's this whole discussion of this like master key that was found in the door that goes back and forth. It's in the headlines a lot, but it seems like it was actually just left there during this kind of confusion after they found her body, and people were going in and out before the police came, and that it really didn't amount to anything, but it really seemed to people to amount to stuff. So, there's a whole discussion in the book about this extra key. Oh, here we go. did Martin have any remaining family? So he actually did have a big family. As a historian, I've really gotten good at tracking down people till about 1940. And that's at this point, the latest census that we can really get data for. His brother, Tom, worked at the VA hospital. And I was able to trace it down to his kids, but I haven't been able to actually track down a living family member. And that's true of the Clevengers as well. So I would love to talk to Clevengers and Moores that might still be alive today and certainly remembering anything. But anyone that was alive in 1936 has passed away. And certainly neither Martin or Helen had any living children. But that's something I would really love to do. Did anything come of the bullet casing? There was a lot said about it at trial. They had a forensic expert that definitively tied the bullet and the casing to the gun that was found under Martin Moore's house. Initially they had said that they couldn't find where the ammunition was sold in Asheville, but then at trial they pull up Uncle Sam's loan office, which is a pawn shop, and have a couple guys testify that Martin did buy the gun and the ammunition there. So that's a pretty big discrepancy as well. And Martin sticks to his story that it was his gun, but he had lent it to Lem Roddy, this other bellhop at the hotel, and not gotten it back until after the murder. And then in a much later story, in 1937, there's actually some discussion about Roddy who had borrowed the gun, lending the gun to a prominent white man. So, it all ends up tying back together in this kind of crazy way.
Something I wanted to ask is, there's maybe this detail that it seems like it's overlooked, but when one of the neighbors in one of the rooms that was adjacent to Helen, she recounted hearing somebody say something like, it'll be over soon, Molly. And, whether or not that was a nickname of Helen or if that was a common nickname at the time, did the investigators ever pick up on that or make anything of that?
They talked about it, this name, and it was never, they talked to her family, Molly or Polly was never a nickname of Helen's. They really went down this rabbit hole of like, well, was somebody coming up there to meet her that night? And they eventually came to the conclusion, and I kind of agree that, she was in her pajamas. So if she had made a date with someone to meet them in her room, likely she would not have already changed into her pajamas, like her bra and underwear she had cleaned out and were laying in the bathroom. Like, I think we could all probably envision like having a one night stand in your hotel room. Like, you're probably going to remain dressed with your undergarments on, not having them rinsed out in the bathroom. So, I think that was kind of a little bit, that it was definitely someone that Helen, did not know whether her door was locked or not as a point of contention. But certainly, if someone knocked on her door, she may have just unlocked it, opened it, and then someone forced their way in.
Well, thanks so much. Thank you all for attending tonight, and thanks for the great questions we've had. I think we're just about here at the end. There's one last question. Was there any knowledge of her knowing or meeting the Branch son during Helen's first trip to Asheville?
Gosh, I would love it if there was. No, and I really looked into, in the 30s and earlier too, there's like, all this, there's the society pages, which talks about like when people are like, so-and-so's visiting Asheville. So, I was hoping for this like awesome, like, oh, Eugene Branch is visiting Asheville. But, neither of them are really mentioned in the papers at that point. I do kind of go into their histories a little bit more in the book. But yeah, I really looked into them and really tried to place them. It seems like the younger son is in Asheville, but of course he's not the one that Brown is writing about, but also if he is in Asheville, Brown doesn't need to write to another police department to ask for investigation into him. So if he's just hearing rumors like Branch's son, and he's looking into both, so there's certainly a lot up in the air about that, and I wish I knew more.
Thanks so much. This is a really great book for anybody that's interested in picking it up. I think, and really lets the primary sources and all the evidence, track and follows those. So there's a lot more that wasn't even covered tonight. If you are interested in reading that, and will you tell us, where can we find your book at?
You can Malaprops here in town, and if you registered for the presentation tonight, I believe Trevor sent you a discount code, and if not, you can email him and ask for it. So I'd love to support our local bookstores. It certainly is available through online retailers as well. But yeah, certainly support local if you can. I assume over there at Buncombe County Special Collections and Pack Library, if you're in Buncombe County, that the library should have a copy available for checkout.
Yeah, and I want to take a second and say thank you very much to Buncombe County Special Collections. I forgot to mention them. Initially, we were supposed to hold this event live in person. Due to COVID restrictions, we couldn't make that happen, but they've been a great help in promoting this event. So thank you to them. I just want to take a quick second and share with you some of the upcoming things we have going on at Wincha. If you're interested in our events, here at the house, we have a new temporary exhibit, Unearthing Our Forgotten Past. It's on Fort San Juan in the Native American village of Uwara. So that's open and included with your house tour and admission. We're open Thursday through Saturday from 10:30 until 4 o'clock. And give you a little rundown of some of the events we have coming up soon. Whenever my page loads. So our next event is actually another LitCafe. We have one coming up shortly. Peter Barr, who has been a trails expert in Western North Carolina for years, has a new book on exploring North Carolina's lookout towers. And it's chock full of great photographs, great history, and then also really interesting descriptions of how to hike to some of these places. So that's coming up September 7th. Then we have an outdoor outing on the French Broad River on September 11th. We still have plenty of tickets left for that, but it is limited to 25 people total, so act quickly, get your spot on that. Guastavino marker dedication, that's in Black Mountain on the 13th. And we have a few other events coming up throughout the year also. We have another outdoor experience. And then our October programming is dedicated to labor and kind of textile history in Western North Carolina. And so we have 3 separate events for that. And then our programming in November, we also have a new event we just added today, looking at the land of the sky. So be sure to check out our event calendar, see all the upcoming events we have, and we hope you'll join us for some of these. Just a reminder, like I said, the event's recorded and will be available within just a few days. So I'll give you a notification of that when it's available. But otherwise, I want to thank everyone for attending tonight, and I'll bid you a good night.
Oh, thanks, everyone.